Thank you for joining us this evening for the April Pueblo Historical and Archaeological Societies program. I'm Megan Wilbar, Museum Coordinator for the InfoZone Museum at the Rawlings Library. This evening, we are pleased to have Dr. Haimi Awe presenting on Maya archaeology in Belize. Spencer Little, Vice President of PAWS, is also joining us to do a proper introduction to tonight's program. Thank you both for being here tonight, and I'll turn it over to you, Spencer.
Thank you so much, Megan, and thanks to the Rawlings Library and the Pueblo City County Library District for helping make these talks possible. Also want to say thanks to our president, Doug Baxter, who will be joining us a little later. I'm filling in to give the presentation, so thanks to him for always arranging excellent speakers and everything else he does in his role as president. Before I introduce our speaker, Dr. Awe, I would like to just make a couple of notes, what PAWS has been up to and ways people can get involved. Any of this you can find in our Midden, which is our bi-monthly newsletter. You can find it on our website, puebloarchaeology.org. A couple of highlights I want to mention. We're doing our book club discussion on April the 26th. The book is Gods of the Upper Air, and those should be available at the Pueblo Heritage Museum. So people who want to get involved are encouraged to reach out to them. And then just another couple projects the Archaeological Society is working on. We've done some long-range planning. We have a lot of projects to get involved with, and the two big ones we're trying to get rolling again are the Projectile Point Project, where we're mapping points in private collections. So if people are interested, you can get in touch for that. And the other thing, as you know, Pueblo is putting in all these murals along our new levee along the river. And the Archaeological Society is looking to sponsor a mural on the prehistory of our region. So again, for those two projects, recommend you to get in touch through our website, puebloarchaeology.org. So thanks again, everybody, for being here. Dr. Awe, thank you for being here. I'll read the short introduction and turn it over to you. Dr. Haimi Awe is an associate professor of anthropology at Northern Arizona University, member emeritus of the Belize Institute of Archaeology, and director of the Belize Valley Archaeological Reconnaissance Project. He received his bachelor's degree with honors and a master's degree in anthropology at Trent University in Ontario, Canada, and his PhD from the Institute of Archaeology at the University of London. Between 2003 and 2014, he served as the first director of the Belize Institute of Archaeology, where he was responsible for managing the archaeological heritage of his home country, Belize. During his extensive professional career, he directed conservation efforts at several of the major archaeological sites in Belize, and his research has focused on questions that span from the Paleo-Indian period to the time of European conquest in the 16th century. More recently, his research has addressed questions related to the rise of cultural complexity in Western Belize and on human responses to environmental stress during the decline of Maya civilization. We're very honored to have you here, Dr. Awe, and look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Spencer. And I'm really glad to be here and, to have this opportunity to share with you guys some of the really amazing stuff that we've been privileged to work with and some of the discoveries we've made in Western Belize. So can you tell me okay, there we go. And I just want to make sure, okay, so that works, right? So anyway, as Spencer noted, today I want to share with you some of the highlights of some work that I've been doing now through NAU, but also in collaboration with my colleagues back in Belize. But my work at Xunantunich really didn't start in 2015. In fact, I first went to Xunantunich back in 2000, even though I'd been to the site many times. But before we go there, I just thought, let me go with this slide here, just in case, some of you guys don't know where Belize is. I decided to throw that in there with that little arrow. But having said that, I know that there are lots of folks from Colorado who vacation in Belize. So I'm sure that all of you guys know exactly where it is. Well, the part of Belize that I work in is right along the border between Belize and Guatemala, if you look at this slide. And here you can see some of the various sites that I've done some research in over the last, 20 some years or more. Today, I want to focus, on Xunantunich, which you can see right there. And this map gives you a better sense of where it's located. You can see the Belize-Guatemala border there, and there's Xunantunich in red, one of the largest sites in the Belize River Valley. Well, like I said, even though when I was, living in Belize and going to Xunantunich, even as an archaeologist many years ago, it was one of those sites that I never really wanted to work at. And I remember saying that to some of my colleagues and friends, and they would always say, why not? And my response was, everyone who had ever worked in Belize, going back to before I was born, always worked at Xunantunich. And so I said, people have been going here or researching here for over 100 years. I mean, there's really nothing left to do that's really exciting. Well, I ate my words, because in 2000, early in 2000, I was teaching at the University of New Hampshire, and I got this call from the Minister of Tourism asking me if I would be willing to go back home and to direct this really major project that the government wanted to do. And that project was called the Tourism Development Project. Its purpose was to, excavate and conserve some of the largest sites in the country of Belize. And the reason the Belize government wanted to do this is because Belize was a latecomer to what I call archaeotourism. Mexico had been doing it forever, Guatemala, especially at Tikal, Honduras, at Copan. And Belize, we were not really focusing on the development of our archaeological sites and for their development as tourist destinations. So this project was born, which is funded by the Ministry of Tourism and a loan from the Inter-American Development Bank. So one of the first things I had to do is to select those big sites in Belize that we would do work in. And one of the largest sites in the country is the site of Caracol that you can see here. And it had, and still has, the tallest structure in the country of Belize. So this is one of the sites that I selected. Xunantunich was another one. But let me just show you what we did quickly at Caracol. This is that structure that I said represents the tallest structure in the country of Belize today. It's about 150 feet tall. And in 2001, after we had just started the project, this is what that building looked like. And I started to work there in January 2001. And I had, you can see some folks down below to give you a sense of scale, massive building. And I had about 50 guys working on this building. We'd work 20 days nonstop, then take 10 days off, then go back for another 20, and then 10 days off. And it took us just over a year to completely excavate and conserve that building. And that's what that turned out to look like after we had finished. This is just a view from the summit of that tall building. Well, as I mentioned, Xunantunich was one of those sites too that we had selected. And in 2000, concurrently with the work I was doing at Caracol, we also went here and we started to do some work. So this is really, it's not really a good or accurate reconstruction of what the site, the downtown part of the site looks like, but it gives you a good sense of it. And like at Caracol, we had this massive building here that we call the Castillo. And this is what the Castillo looked like in 2001. So, again, to try to convert the site as a tourist destination, we spent a lot of time focusing on the excavation of this building. And so in 2001, here we are getting, get the work going, and you can see some of the guys excavating and we're conserving as we move along. After about 6 months or so, I remember getting into a helicopter just to fly around to see what the site was starting to look like. Well, on this side here, on that flank, there was also this beautiful stucco frieze that was really looking bad. And I will share some of the work we did on that in a moment. But let me just continue showing you some of the other stuff we did in the Castillo. As you can see from this slide, right, this central section here, after we had finished this part of the building, I thought there's no way we can leave that like that. It's going to look like, there's nothing happening there. So we decided then to focus some attention there. And here we are excavating that section. And about a year later, after we had done the whole front of the building, that was what it looked like. Well, I mentioned that, we had this amazing stucco frieze that had been found along this flank of this building back in the 1950s by this archaeologist from the University of Pennsylvania. And after they had exposed the stucco frieze, they decided to put a metal roof on it because the rains were going to just dissolve the stucco, and we were going to lose this amazing monument. Well, there's a problem with that. And that is that, it's still, when it rained, the wind and the water would still wash in. And we were having, well, not me, but my predecessors were having to spend a lot of time continuing to do conservation work. And even worse, every time there was a major hurricane in Belize, the wind would just rip the roof off and we would donate it to Guatemala because the site's right along the border with Guatemala. And then we'd have to go and build a new roof over it. And so in the 1970s, some of the guys who were running the Belize Department of Archaeology decided that's it, right? We're spending way too much money on these roofs. And they just left it exposed. Sadly, they were not doing the type of maintenance work that was required. So in 2000, when I came there to do the tourism project, I remember taking this photograph and thinking, there is no way we can leave this like this. I have to do something. And so I had done some research, and I knew that in some parts of the world, they will sometimes make replicas out of fiberglass and then cover it over, cover the original over with the fiberglass. And so we decided, why not give it a shot? Well, we had nobody in Belize that knew how to do this. So I brought in this guy from Guatemala who had had some experience. And this guy was a master, artist and conservationist. So the first thing he did, right, he got up there, that's him actually standing on the side, and he did a drawing to scale, both in black and white and in color. And then he said to me, well, we can't make a mold to make the replica over the original, because when we pull the latex, it'll destroy the original. And I said, well, how are we going to do this? And he said, we're going to have to build an exact duplicate of that large frieze. Well, this bloody thing is about 30 feet across by about, almost 9 feet tall. And he said, we can do it. So we started this work. We built this thatched roof shelter, and we brought up all kinds of clay and rocks. And here is Gustavo, right, starting to, the guys are kneading the clay and all that. And he started to build and train some of Belizean guys to build a replica. And there he is, right, carving, making a duplicate of that huge frieze up on top. And here you can see how long, right? You can see a person, there was a visitor there taking some photographs as we were progressing with making this replica. Here again, as we're going along. So this is ours. And the problem with it, though, is we used to have to place wet blankets over it so it wouldn't start to crack. And then eventually we started to make the mold. And there are the guys, painting the latex over our version or duplicate of the original mask. And when we finished, we realized that we couldn't do a huge, long replica because we couldn't get a crane up here. And then how do you get it on the side of the building? So we made it in several sections. And here you can see, you know, us struggling with the 6 sections of the replica as we tried to bring it up to the top of this building. And then we even got some pulleys to, you know, to help the guys instead of carrying it, because the wind can get really mean up there. And we didn't want to have these guys blown away or blown over to Guatemala as well. So eventually we get it up to the top. And I had this friend of mine who, you know, from England, who had also done some conservation work. And so he was helping us, and he brought in these like, 24-inch long metal screws. And you can see the screws down here that we had to anchor our replica and make sure we weren't destroying the original that we had conserved behind it. Well, here was the end result of our conservation work on that. It is the most incredible piece of conservation work I have ever been involved with. You know, again, you can see where it is that we started and what it looked like when we finished. So it was just, like I said, just incredible. And today, after almost 20 years, that replica is still there. We go back and check it. And with the fiberglass, we can patch it up if there's a problem. And the original is buried underneath it. And if I didn't tell you that that is a replica, nobody would know. Well, we also, you know, besides focusing on that building, we excavated, you know, this one structure here, another little pyramid there, and we did some work in this area. I'll just quickly share with you some of that work. This little building, structure A14, had been excavated by a whole bunch of people. And so I mostly exposed the rest of it and then conserved it. And then I remember one day thinking, I wonder if anyone excavated at the base of the building, because we often find offerings, caches as we call them, you know, that were placed there to dedicate the construction of these buildings. And sure enough, we dug down there, and nobody, after more than 100 years, had ever bothered to do so. And you can see the caches. We found 2 caches that were separated. And interestingly, they each had 9 objects. This one has 8 eccentrics and a little jade bead. 9 is a number associated with the levels of the Maya underworld. This one other pyramid that we call structure A4, somebody had trenched it, and you can see the trench going right through the middle of that building. But they hadn't bothered to do any more exploration. So here it is, you know, as we started to do some of our work, you can see the guys starting to excavate. And after about 3 months, we had exposed the whole front of the building. And then up on top, at the summit here, we came across all kinds of offerings. In fact, on the floor, we found these ladle sensors. And then there was a spot where somebody had broken through the floor and then covered it over, but they had not sealed it. So I said to the guys, there's got to be something here. And so we start to excavate. We found 4 skulls. You can see one over there, these other skulls, and 4 of these large incense burners that had been smashed and then scattered around the skulls. And then deep inside the building, we found, you know, this crypt with an elite individual. You can see the bones. They had sprinkled cinnabar over it, and as a result, it stained the skeletal remains. And we found a bunch of other artifacts. And I don't want to spend too much time on this because I want to show you what we've been doing more recently. But again, right, here's that building when we started to work on it. And there's after we were almost finished with our conservation work. And there's when this whole thing had been completed. Well, after that project finished in 2004, I remained in Belize as the director of the Institute of Archaeology right up until 2014. And at 2014, I had decided I'd really missed teaching. I always loved teaching. And so I decided to resign my job, and I applied for jobs. Actually, I applied for 2 jobs here in the U.S. and got an interview here at NAU and got hired. So left the Belize job, came here, and started to teach at NAU. That was 2014. Well, my colleagues back in Belize said, "Look, does this mean you're going to quit continuing the kind of work in terms of conservation that you've been doing in Belize?" And so I said, "No, I promise that I will continue to assist the Belize government and my home country to continue this kind of work." I said, "But it takes money." And I said, "Tell me, what site were you thinking that you'd like me to continue doing some work?" And they said, Xunantunich. And I was like, "No," right? I had said I never wanted to go work there, but I did. And I thought that was my long goodbye. Well, that goodbye was longer than I thought. So I got in touch with a couple different people, and especially this gentleman by the name of Doug Tilden, who had been funding some of the work that I had been doing. And so I said, "Hey, Doug, would you fund a new project at the site of Xunantunich?" And he said, "Come up with a plan, give it to me and I'll look it over. And if I think it's, a worthwhile project to do, then yes, I promise to fund you for about 5 years." And thus was born the Xunantunich Archaeology and Conservation Project that we had planned from 2015 to 2020. And the purpose was to continue the work I had done under that tourism development project, but also to do some research and to see where this site fit in terms of the political landscape of the greater Belize River Valley. Because, like I said, I did a lot more work at other sites. So in 2015, right, as part of my proposal to Doug, the areas highlighted were the areas that I wanted to do some work. And I thought, we'll start off with the areas in sort of red right there. And then the next year, we'll do the areas highlighted in blue, and then the third year in green, and then the fourth year in yellow. Well, plans have to be dynamic, right? And Murphy's Law. So things change. But anyway, in 2015, I head down to Belize with my first group of grad students and undergrad students from NAU and from a bunch of other schools. And you will remember this building because this is what we did in 2001 to 2004. So one of the little buildings I had always wanted to excavate and conserve is this little one here that's called Structure A20. And so there are a couple of my grad students, and Hannah Zanotto, she's now doing a PhD at University of Arizona in Tucson. But that was what A20 looked like in 2015. So here, the NAU gang, a couple of the grad students and undergrad students, and we excavated that building. And that's what it looked like after we finished conserving it. I mean, it's just, it's really awesome to be able to do this, to go from a mound that's covered in dirt and you have no concept of what it's going to look like. And then, you find that it's fairly well preserved, and then you add, some conservation effort to it, and then voila, right? It's brought back to life, so to speak. In the main courtyard here, I had done, this is the building that I had showed you a little while ago, where we found that offering up there with all the skulls and those beautiful incense burners. So we decided to complete excavations of the triadic shrine, the other 2 temples. And that's what it looked like when we started in 2015. And when we finished our excavations and then conservation, that's what, those buildings look like. So those are those buildings there on the east side of the courtyard. So in the following year, we decided that we should focus some attention on structure A9. That's that little pyramid right there, and also on the ball court and on structure A7. And another little group there known as Group B, and the work up there. Anyway, so here's structure A9, right, on the west side of this great downtown section of the city of Xunantunich. Well, I took another batch. Every year I take a new batch of my grad students, and then they go back with me for a second year. And then they write up their thesis, and they go on to do PhDs or to do CRM or to other types of work. Well, in 2016, this one grad student of mine had never, ever, she had done, I think, some work in CRM around Arizona, but had never worked in Mesoamerica or the Maya region of Mesoamerica, and certainly never monumental architecture. So I said, Diane, you're going to write your thesis on the excavations of structure A9. And, she was like, oh my gosh, I've never done anything. I said, don't worry, I'm going to be there with you. And if I can do it, you can do it. And I said, other people have worked on this building. You see up on top, there's a crater up there because this British medical doctor, wannabe archaeologist, at the turn of the 1800s, 1900s, he had dug in there and he had found a burial and wrote up about what he had found. And then in the 1990s, a group from UCLA had excavated the southern flank of the building. And so I said, if nothing else, you can write about the architecture. We likely will not find, a lot of stuff that you got to be really worried about. Was I wrong? So there's Diane, dutifully taking notes. And here we are. First thing I do is I always excavate the base to see the quality of the architecture. And then I put a narrow strip trench up the main axis of the building. So as you can see, Diane is standing right close to this broken monument. We call these stelae, or for plural, or stela if it's just one stela. And I remember saying to Diane, I said, Diane, the Maya often put offerings at the base of their stelae. I said, because if you guys remember the little temple that I found those two caches back in 2001 to 2004, is directly east across the courtyard from this temple. And I said, for some reason, it looks like people who have excavated here before have not been placing excavations where I would put them. Let's go for broke. Let's put an excavation unit at the base of the stela. So we did, and guess what? Bingo, we found this cache of eccentric lithics. Some of them are in different shapes, like, scorpions and, serrated points and all that. And then some of them were very crude. But we found 28 of them, right? So after we found that, I said, hey, if nobody dug there, across the courtyard at the base of the stairs, I found I found those two caches that I showed you guys. I said, Diane, put an excavation unit there. Bingo! We found another cache. This one had several objects. 9 of these obsidian eccentrics, many of them serrated. Well, these are like, we call these centipedes. Some of them are like scorpions, some are like crescents, but caches come in all different forms and shapes and sizes, right? In addition to these, we found some marine shell, some fragments of coral from the reef, some iron pyrite, and all kinds of really interesting stuff. Well, here's the base of that building. There's that stela. And as we were following the stairs, we call this a stair-side inset. I remember exposing the front of what I thought was the side of the building. And one of the guys, I remember calling me and said, I think we got the side of the building and it looks really well preserved. So I went there and I grabbed my my trowel and I'm scraping and I go, that doesn't sound like plaster. So I bang it a little bit and there's a clinky sound. I said, that sounds like really hard limestone. And sure enough, we find this panel right there. You can see it in the slide. and Tilico is one of the Maya guys. He's my chief conservator. We find this panel against the stair side. And we went back at night because you get much better photography. And you can see our night photograph. And then when we lifted it up, because they had been, the panel had been placed on its side, you can see all the hieroglyphic inscriptions. I'll come back to that in a little while. So we found that on the southern flank of the central stairway. So I said, Diane, the Maya, every time we believe that the Maya are going to be symmetrical, it's archaeology, Maya 1, archaeologist 0. They prove us wrong. I said, but you know what? Let's go on the other side and see if we find another panel. And we did. But this panel was interesting, right? It was a bit different. It was broken almost in half. And if you look, this is the stair side outset. And panel 3 was found right against that. Not so panel 4. It was just off. And it was broken. Very likely because some large tree may have, fallen back in antiquity and broken it and pushed it over. Or perhaps, Maya, who may have revisited the site after abandonment, may have also moved it. We don't know. But anyway, that's where we found panel 4. And panel 4, again, beautifully preserved. We put it on the side, and then I just flipped my photograph because you can see it has a date. There's a number there with glyph we call kankin. And like I said, I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. So we found that, panel, 2 panels now, 2 caches. And one day I stand back and I'm taking this photograph, and you can see the stairway that we preserved already and the rest of the stairs. That's where Thomas Gann in the 1890s had dug his pit. And right here, it looked like the stairs disappeared. Now, having done this for most of my life, I know that whenever the preservation doesn't, match up as well like this, there's usually 2 reasons. One, trees or some other force of nature may have destroyed the architecture and they tumbled and rolled down the bottom of the pyramid. Or 2, there's a cavity down below that collapses and then eventually gets filled in with dirt. And that could explain why we don't find the stairs there. So I said to Diane, I just feel lucky. Why don't we assume it's the second reason? And we're going to excavate a unit down in the center there. And sure enough, we find a tomb that had collapsed. And of course, it was filled in, and usually when you find tombs, or often, you find the capstone right where my little cursor is, still there. So you can just lift it and lower yourself down in the tomb. Not in this case. So it took us, I remember about a week and a half to excavate all the dirt that had fallen in there. There's Doug Tilden, the guy who has been funding all this work, and some of our workers and one of my students. And unfortunately, a lot of the ceramic vessels that were in there had been smashed by the collapse of the roof. But hey, we know how to put those things back together. So let me just take a quick sip of water here. We also had this dream team of colleagues down there. These 2 colleagues of mine, both, PhDs in archaeology. Lee Meadows was teaching at the time at the University of Tennessee, where they have the body farm. And my other colleague here was at the University of Montana, both of them bioarchaeologists. So they were helping with excavating the skeletal remains. And there again is Doug, the guy who, like I said, funds the work that we do. And he always comes down for about 4 weeks. He loves this kind of stuff. He's worked in Egypt and all over the place. But anyway, after we had finished clearing it, you can see we had about 38 ceramic vessels and a whole bunch of other things. There was the remains of a feline, probably jaguar down here. We had dog remains. obsidian blades, jade jewelry, spindle whorl. This is just a little sample of some of the stuff inside. I mentioned 38 ceramic vessels, just a sample of some of these ceramic vessels. They would have been much better preserved had the roof not collapsed. This is after we've spent lots of time gluing the pieces together. A bunch of others, of more ceramic vessels. Well, what did this all mean? I'll tell you, when we found these two panels, this was big news. In fact, it made news all over the world. We were getting calls from, several news outlets in the US, Canada, Europe, Australia, Mexico, South America, because the two panels we had found were part of a hieroglyphic stair that had been discovered many, many years before. But I'll come to that in a sec. Because of its importance, my ex-student, now colleague of mine, who is an epigrapher, specializes on reading Maya hieroglyphic inscriptions, we published two articles back to back on the significance of both of those panels. But anyway, what was so significant about the panels? Well, the moment we started to look at the panels, one of the first things that struck us is that the style of carving did not look anything like the monuments we have from Xunantunich. Even the way it was executed in these, you can see, right, they are encircled, they're in groups of four in these sort of cartouches. That is not typical of Xunantunich. Furthermore, the type of stone it was carved on did not look local. But having worked at Caracol, remember we started off this presentation and I showed you slides of Caracol. It reminded me of the limestone that we have up at Caracol. Now, when Christoph started to look at the inscriptions and realizing that this was part of this hieroglyphic stair, it then made us realize that one of the main significance of these monuments, of the two panels, is that it was really a tale of five cities. We found the two panels at Xunantunich, but it had implications for Naranjo in Guatemala, Caracol in Belize, and Calakmul and Zibanche in the state of Campeche and Quintana Roo in Mexico. Let me explain to you why. So I mentioned that these two panels, right away we recognize, if you look at the style here, right, and these four glyphs within a cartouche, was very typical of this hieroglyphic stair that had been discovered by this Austrian archaeologist in 1905 at the site of Naranjo in Guatemala. In 1909, this American archaeologist traveling through Belize and then into Guatemala visited Naranjo, and he also reports the presence of the stair in Naranjo. In 1970, this British archaeologist working for Harvard University goes back to Naranjo, and when he gets there, he photographs it. In the 1980s, almost all the panels are looted and they disappear, except for one fragment, which is still in Guatemala. The rest are scattered across the world. Between that time and our discovery, another section of this stair had been found at a site called Ucanal, about maybe 20 kilometers, maybe less probably, south of Xunantunich. And a fragment had been found at Caracol. So because of these discoveries, we knew that panel 4 could fit. If you were an epigrapher and you started to decipher what this was telling us, we knew that our panel 4 would fit right between this first panel, which is called panel 5 in Naranjo, And then the panel 3, or last one, would have fit down at the bottom of it. What we also were able to deduce from all this is that we know that this ruler from Caracol, known as Lord Can II, he had commissioned the stairway following his defeat of Naranjo around 631 AD, and that the hieroglyphic stair had been put in place in front of a temple at Caracol, the city where Lord Can II was a ruler. Our panel 4 also told us that they do this, they place this hieroglyphic stair no earlier than December 7, 642 AD, because that was the date on the monument. And interestingly, the monument 3, provided 3 statements. It mentions the death of this woman called Lady Batsek in 638 AD. Guess who she is? She's the mother of Lord Can II, the guy who commissions the stairs. It also tells us of the death of this ruler of the Snake Dynasty from the city of Calakmul, and the capture of this guy. And then it makes reference to a ball game. We know that he was decapitated after that ball game. Panel 4 gave us this date of 642 AD, confirming that this is when the stairs had been commissioned and placed at the city of Caracol. Right? I can skip that. I've already said that to you guys. So the question is, what the hell are parts of this monument doing at Xunantunich? Right? Was it possible? How did it get there? Well, today we know that Naranjo eventually enacts revenge of Caracol, goes up, attacks Caracol, rips off the hieroglyphic stairs, and say, you're not going to brag in your city that you kicked our butt. And they took most of the hieroglyphic stair and then re-erected at Naranjo, but in an illegible order. So it really doesn't make sense. It's like you take this text and you cut pieces of it and you move it around, so it has no sense whatsoever. All you know that the people who erected it originally, to brag about them beating you, can no longer do this. Now, the question that people started to ask us, is it possible that they could have moved these heavy monuments all the way there? And the answer is yes. There's a slate monument at Calakmul that's over 100 kilometers from Caracol that we know was donated by Caracol to Calakmul. Why do we know that? Because there's no slate in the Yucatan Peninsula, in the flat areas of the Yucatan Peninsula. Definitely none in Campeche, and definitely none, at Calakmul. Where do you find the nearest source of slate? Close to Caracol, and Caracol has several slate stelae. Think about Stonehenge. Those huge boulders at Stonehenge were moved by the Druids from about 50 miles away. So humans can move monuments from very far. In fact, we know that Egypt produced many obelisks. Yet today, most of the obelisks that were produced by the Egyptians are not in Egypt. They're actually located, if we were doing this face to face, I'd ask the audience if anyone knows where. Most of the obelisks from Egypt are in Europe, many in Rome. Why Rome? We know the Romans, invaded, took over Egypt, and then shipped some of them. Right? In fact, twice, right, the Italians invaded and took over under Napoleon as well. So definitely, right, humans can move these kinds of monuments for very great distances. So, as I said, right, what we do know is that this hieroglyphic stair is dedicated by Lord Khan II at Caracol in 642 AD to brag about his ability to defeat Naranjo. But then, 18 years later, they get their comeuppance. Naranjo goes and attacks Caracol with some allies. And we believe Xunantunich was one of those allies. And Caracol is defeated. And Naranjo rips the stairway. And what does it do? Takes a bunch of it back to Naranjo. But bequeaths or gives, right? Gifts several pieces to some of its allies. A fragment to Ucanal and 2 big fragments to Xunantunich for their participation in that war. Well, the other question we had was, good, so we can explain now those 2 panels at the base of structure A9. Is it possible, right? Is it possible that this individual buried in our tomb may have been associated with this event, this war? And as a result, it was the reason why we found these panels in front of their funerary temple. That's kind of logical, right? So, but for us to prove that that was the case, it meant we had to prove that the individual buried in our tomb had to have been alive to have participated in that military event. Well, we went about to do some good archaeology to figure out whether that person was alive and whether or not they could have been, participated in the war between Naranjo and Caracol. So here's what we knew from not just the panels, but also from monuments at Caracol, right? We knew that, we knew that Lady Batsek, the mother of Lord Khan II, who dedicates the hieroglyphic stair, she arrives at Caracol around 584 AD. She's a foreigner from Caracol. She is from the Snake Dynasty. So it's an alliance between folks in the Snake Dynasty with Caracol. She gets there, a whole bunch of things happen. She gives birth to Khan II. He eventually succeeds his father and becomes king. And then he attacks Naranjo and defeats Naranjo and then dedicates the hieroglyphic stair at Caracol in 642 AD to brag about him beating Naranjo. Now, we know that eventually Naranjo gets revenge, and that happens in 680 AD. What does this mean? This means the hieroglyphic stair could not have been removed from Caracol before 680 AD. And so our guy in the tomb had to have been alive sometime around 680 AD, right? At least, 10, 15 years before that, for him to have participated in that war. Well, forget that stuff there, right? We talk about getting lucky. 2 of the ceramic vessels in our tomb actually had hieroglyphic dates. In fact, if you look in here, this is a period ending date, and it has 8 Ahau. It's like, if it's like Sunday, January 1st. Well, we know Sunday, January 1st doesn't happen every year on a Sunday. January 1st sometimes doesn't show up again until 8 or more years have passed. So we did the calculation, and we know that that date is in 692 AD. A second vessel in our tomb also had a date. There you can see the Ahau glyph, right? The period ending glyph. And that date ends in 672 AD. So these 2 ceramic vessels in the tomb are almost coeval. So let's look at our dates again, right? Here, let me just throw these up. So that's when Naranjo defeats Caracol. This is one of the dates in one vessel, and that's the other date in the vessel. Look at that. Beautiful, right? They really cluster there together. So today, thankfully, we can date animal remains and human remains. So we sent a small fragment of the shattered bones from the individual in the tomb to be dated. And there's the date that it came. Unfortunately, it came with a plus minus range of 660 to 775 AD. That person was alive somewhere within that bracket. Let's throw up the other dates. We've seen these other dates. So again, if you look, this is when Naranjo defeats Caracol. So if our individual was born around 660 AD, they'd have been about 20 years old. Or they were, around 665 AD. They would have been 15 years old when Caracol is defeated by Naranjo. Beautiful. Well, we wanted to take this to town. So we also had deer remains in the tomb. And we had a nice piece that was well preserved that we also sent to be dated. And look at the dates. The brackets 690 to 890. It's really big plus or minus because there's a plateau in the radiocarbon sequence around that time. In spite of that, right? 690 to 890, again, let's throw up the other dates. It overlaps, it clusters nicely in there. And the deer could have been killed after, right, this individual had been alive and then placed in as food, to accompany the dead on their journey to the underworld. So what is amazing about all this is said that our individual in the tomb could have been alive, could have participated in that war. And that is the reason why, they were gifted these panels and why they placed them in front of their funerary temple. There's one more piece of really cool evidence. How are we doing for time? I better hurry up here. So we wanted to know, was this person in here a ruler that was from Naranjo that came in? And so we decided to run strontium isotope analysis, where you can analyze the bone and you can tell whether the person is local or foreign. Well, here's the strontium values for, for our guy in the tomb. It fits smack in the mean range, in the range of strontium value for people who were born and raised in the Belize River Valley. The individual was a home person. They were local. So they were not from a different city. We decided to do one more analysis and we ran DNA. And what the DNA told us was that this individual in our tomb, who for a long time we were assuming was a male, turned out to be a woman. And what is really interesting is that there are a lot of very accomplished women in Maya society. In fact, a ruler from Naranjo, known as popularly as Lady Six Sky, she ruled Naranjo because her son, who was supposed to be king, was about 5 years old when his father died, and she ruled till he came of age. There are also important women rulers at sites across the Maya lowlands. And so what this told us is that we at Xunantunich may have found another, example of these really amazing women rulers at some of the sites, in the late classic period. So, like I said, right, when all this was coming down, my grad student, who had never worked in the Maya era before, she was just like, oh, this is totally unbelievable. Talk about, your first archaeological experience. And I remember saying to her, I said, Diane, this will never, ever happen to you again. All right? This doesn't happen to a lot of my colleagues who have worked 50 years or more, right, doing archaeology, to find all this stuff, right, caches, panels with hieroglyphic inscriptions, tombs, and then all this cool information that has allowed us to make all these connections. I said, that happens, once in every 10 lifetimes. But she wrote this awesome MA thesis, and today she's doing a PhD at the University of Northern Carolina, UNC, North Carolina. Anyway, a couple other things that, we have found at Xunantunich. That little temple is just to the left of this picture here. When we were doing the work there, another one of my grad students wanted to excavate this palace. There are rooms buried down there. And so I said, sure, let's go for it. And you can see we exposed several rooms. And in room 7, the central room right here, she found all kinds of graffiti. So you can see the door going into the room. If I go back, right, there's that door. And inside the room on the floor is, you step up. Every one of these are examples of graffiti that we had found here. And, example, look here. There's this little guy. You can see he's wearing a fancy jaguar headdress. He's got a spear in his hand. On another one, you had another individual with a spear in his hand. This is what we call a patoli board. Another one had this individual looking in what might have been a pyrite mirror. And then we also have one of these period ending dates, which give us a date in the late classic period. Then in 2018, I took one of my students, I think she's from Phoenix, and same thing. I think her undergraduate major was psychology and never done any work in archaeology. So I said, what's her name again? It'll come to me in a second. I said, tell you what, how about you excavate the ball court? This is just a little to the south of the pyramid. And this ball court had been excavated by the same medical doctor in the late 1800s, and also by the guys from UCLA. And that's what it looked like. And I wanted to do some conservation work. So here we are. Now, one of the things that I have learned to do at Xunantunich, because it looks like a lot of people who had worked there before didn't do, is you excavate down the playing alley of ball courts, because sometimes we find caches. And indeed, the guys from UCLA, they only put an excavation at the center, and they had found the remains of this juvenile, really young individual, and a couple other things. So I said, we're going to excavate deep units, stagger them from all along the playing alley. And here you can see some examples of them. Well, the first excavation unit we put in, right? These were subsequent. This is where the UCLA gang had put in their excavation, and I reopened it. But anyway, first one, we're coming down. We find this ceramic vessel upside down, and you can see the little hole there. We start to clean around it, and we're finding eccentrics. We clear all around in the eccentrics. We lift the lid, and inside the lid, we find 4 stingray spines. There's one of the stingray spines. And look at all the eccentrics. In total, we found 4 stingray spines and about 40 eccentrics inside of them. And here's just a sample. They included obsidian eccentrics, as well as some little figures, animal shapes, all kinds of stuff. And one of my grad students who might be listening in right now, Jordan Lee, she's going to be coming down to Belize with me in about 6 weeks' time to do a study of these eccentrics for her MA thesis. Here's just another sample. You can see this animal figure. This is a little ancestor figure. It's actually a face with a headdress, scorpion, another scorpion, just really, awesome forms and shapes of these eccentrics. So we found, one cache there, we found another cache here, and 2 more caches there. We found 4 caches of eccentrics. All told, if we add them up, there are over 90 eccentrics, I think, or over 80, or I can't remember. But anyway, a whole bunch of eccentric caches down the ball court. There's some more examples here. And then we conserve the building. So this is just a sequence of, the first one, how it looked like when we started, and then how it looked like when we finished our work. And the corner here of this building, there you can see it, and then the playing alley where we found all those caches. Just another shot. If you climbed up the top of this western ball court building and you took a photograph that way, that would be the view that you got. And again, our trench was down the center where we found all these obsidian caches. We've also been doing some other work in other areas. One of my other grad students that will be coming down to Belize with me might be doing some work in what we call Group B. This summer, I don't have a field school because NAU is not allowing us to do field schools. A couple of my grad students are vaccinated, so they'll come down and do mostly lab work. But we started this work at the end of 2019, and just before, where are we going? Are frozen here? Okay, there. Sorry. Sorry, guys. For some reason, I don't know what's going on. Okay, maybe that'll work. So, okay, yeah. So we started to do some work, and this is what we had done in 2019. And we backfilled it because we were finding this early building down below, almost done. And here's a drawing. The last building was very poorly preserved, but then we found earlier buildings buried below. And we plan to go and conserve it. But we found caches of these beautiful laurel leaf points, this vessel that's broken. We found some graffiti and some more eccentrics in that building. So we covered it, we put a metal roof, and we plan to, this summer, we're going to expose part of it and then conserve it so people can see the earlier phases of architecture. So, and hopefully one of these days you guys can come and visit us down at Xunantunich. This is an angled shot of that pyramid with some of the another stucco frieze that was discovered there and we conserved. So thank you. I know I was sort of long-winded there, but I never expected that, you know, we would make all these discoveries going back to a site where people have been working, you know, for so many years. And the story of Xunantunich certainly continues. And I think we're just so darn lucky and privileged that our NAU project, you know, is continuing this work and contributing to the further development of archaeotourism in Belize. So thank you.